Hey there, it's Adina White with Black Belt. On today's episode, we're turning the microphone over to Dr. Karama Neal. If you're wondering who she is, check out episode 43 to hear her story and learn why she urges people to choose Arkansas as a place to call home. Here's Karama Neal and her conversation with Sam Evans.
Hello, and welcome to Choosing Arkansas, where we share the stories of those who chose Arkansas as their home, and we encourage you to do the same. I'm your host, Karama Neal, and we want to help you make the natural state your natural choice. Today, we are pleased to welcome Samantha Evans, a fifth-generation Arkansan who has returned to the state after leaving for higher education. So thank you for joining us today, Sam. We're really pleased to have you and excited to hear
Yeah,
more about your story.
thanks so much for having me, Karama.
Absolutely. So I wanted to just maybe start off, we wanted to sort of share your story as part of our conversation. So we haven't said a whole lot here. We did say that you have long and deep roots in the state of Arkansas, but you left for higher education. And so tell us about where you went and why you chose there.
Yeah, so I was an Arkansan that was not looking to return back home. I think, when I left the state right after high school, I I was on the trajectory of just moving along, being this career woman that I had seen in all the magazines and all the TV shows. But I'm really happy, after reluctantly coming back to the state, moving back home about 15 years ago and making it my home and making it where I want to build my legacy. And so, really started off, like I said, right after high school, having went and did a few youth tours through a rural electric program, I was able to kind of see and get outside the state, outside of, traveling with my parents, who we mostly did those family vacations that you go for, to go visit a family member or go for a reunion. So you really didn't get a chance to see the communities and really experience the cities. And so chose Atlanta, chose Spelman in particular, is what brought me outside of the state of Arkansas.
Yeah, that's excellent. Obviously, Spelman has such a great reputation. I lived in Atlanta for 14 years myself and really sort of understood that. It's interesting that you say this too, when I think about my own story and obviously why this subject is so important to me. Maybe a little bit like you, when I left high school and went away, I can say this now, I knew enough not to say it out loud then, but at the time I was very clear that I would never live in the South again. Um,
Mhm.
and obviously that changed. I lived in Atlanta and then, lived here, came back home as well. So I appreciate you sharing that. Can you talk a little bit about like what Atlanta was like for you and sort of um, how that compared maybe to the South that you had grown up with here in Arkansas?
Oh man, Karama, it was so starkly different from the little small community that I grew up in Arkansas. It was the community that I grew up in was predominantly white, very small. I think the population, is about 350 people. Those members, people that I grew up with, were often my family relatives, my cousins, so I couldn't turn off a light and get in trouble without somebody telling and letting my mom know before I even got home. It was one of those type of communities. And then going to Atlanta, for my whole college experience and kind of, living up to, being an adult. But I think the biggest thing was not only just Atlanta as a city, actually being able to see people, Black people in all walks of life and in these very much in leadership positions, right? I was there, Shirley Franklin was the mayor, all different types of leadership positions and seeing Black people in those positions in different walks of life. I think was huge value that I took away from, just being, in that whole sort of vibe of the city. Also, Atlanta music was, I mean, the best during that time. So I was up there, learning all these different dance moves. So when I come back to Arkansas, they're like, oh, how did you do that? I was able to get my hair, that was going through when I was moving from a relaxer to, non-relaxed hair, my natural hair, and explaining to family members about that. My grandmother did not like that. I still don't think she likes that. but I was able to embrace that. And then more so at an HBCU, historically Black college and university, like Spelman, was able to not just be this token, right? I was going into a community that fostered for Black women to being able to understand how to thrive. And being able to be in a space where I wasn't just the only smart Black girl, right? And growing up in my classroom, it wasn't the case. There was definitely my cousins who were just as smart as I was, but often in times being in those those spaces. And so now moving to a Spelman where you're not the only one, and that you can kind of see people in these leadership positions kind of helped me to understand, oh, wow, there is space for me and I can take up space. And that's okay. And then kind of fostering, well, what does that mean then? And how do you do that in a way to change the world? And so really kind of understanding that piece of who I am I becoming, I guess you could say, for the first time. And I'm
Yeah.
so happy. I was like, oh yes, Atlanta is going to be home for me. That's what I thought.
I hear you. I remember thinking the same thing at one point when soon after I first moved to Atlanta. It is a special place. I think particularly for Black folks, it is really a special place. And I think part of what I know when I think about my own journey, particularly in Atlanta, and sort of how I moved from, oh yeah, this is where I'm going to live for the rest of my life, to I think I want to come back home at some point. I know that
Mm-hmm.
that journey is different for everybody, but part of it was really sort of thinking about helping me sort of have a comparison point between what Atlanta was like and actually what was really positive and how that foundation that I had in Arkansas prepared me for so much. And I wonder if you could talk a little
Mm-hmm.
bit about that. Like, what were the things in Arkansas that in your upbringing, in your community that prepared you really well for life outside of the state?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Black church. I grew up going to church every Sunday, going to Sunday school with my grandfather, God rest his soul, to an AME church. And and that space, that's where you really see Black leadership in my community. For me in Arkansas was in the Black church. And so being able to see and hear my grandfather, stand up and teach and give the Sunday school review every Sunday, and having my teachers, Miss Keith and Miss Roxy, they made sure that you knew how to review the lesson, the Sunday school lesson, and you were going to stand up. And as well as other community members, like Easter Sunday, you better be prepared for that Easter speech. Like your hair will be pressed, your Easter dress will be fly, but you better be ready to stand up and give your Easter speech without paper. So I have to remind my son this, that you got to be able to stand up there without using a piece of paper. That's how I grew up. That's how it's going to be here. And so I think those pieces and those nuggets really helped to shape me, and being able to understand to be an effective communicator and not be afraid to stand up and to speak. And so that was really like this foundation and grounding that I got while in Arkansas and in my own community, to where whenever I went to Spelman, it was definitely a bigger pond. But because I already had that foundation, I was able to kind of lean into that a little bit more once I got outside the state and continue to utilize that. And it was all from, growing up and going and attending the churches in my community. And, they make you stand up and read the lesson and things of that nature. And they would always volunteer. Oh, Sam, she's going to do this. And I said, I'm a quiet person, a very introvert. Um, Speak quietly most times, but yeah, because of that, I there's no real fear of being able to really stand up and be able to speak.
That's such a great story. So I'm AME as well. I know we knew each other, of course, before this conversation. But I don't think I knew that you were AME. And so yeah, it is. You definitely do have that experience, and it's something I grew up with as well, and I'm pleased to be able to share with my daughter now, too, because it does help you learn those things. I think, I know I'll say this for myself. I think, growing up in Arkansas, oftentimes we were at the bottom of things you don't want to be at the bottom of, and the top of
Mm,
lists you don't want to be at the top of, right?
mm,
And part of what for me was very revealing is being able to go outside of the state. I went to Pennsylvania initially, and then of course to Atlanta, and
Yeah.
recognize that, you know what, I'm actually very well prepared. We're okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Karama, that was not my initial thought for me. Having gone to a really small school like a Bigelow, I went to high school, Bigelow High School. I very much had an inferiority complex because I felt that I wasn't as prepared or as well read. When I walked onto Spelman's campus, it was all fun. And then, like a few weeks after that, they were like, okay, we're all taking tests. We're all starting from the same spot. And so you take these sort of entrance level exams to kind of see where you are to help with placement. And I was surprised. I actually like clept out of 101 Spanish. And I was just so shocked. But once I got into that Spanish class, I was like, whoa, this is a little too much. I need to go kind of at my own pace. And I kind of was like, okay, I'm going to really have to work here. I think what was the greatest thing about growing up in a rural community, at a rural school, was understanding that people don't necessarily want to see you fail, that there is this intrinsic need to kind of help and see you succeed. So in having that value and taking that while I was at Spelman, I reached out, and it was the same sort of value system there, and I was able to get the resources needed. And yes, I eventually came to, I graduated with honors there. And my first year, after my freshman year, I was able to, being able to have a pretty high GPA, which was shocking. But yeah, I had to prove it to myself. So it was more of a mental thing than anything there. But yeah, I think I came away pretty prepared, but it took a minute.
I think it takes a minute for all of us, but I think just like, you say you were surprised that you were able to get out of the 101 Spanish and those kinds of things. Like, I think, and I had that as well. You have this bit like, we feel like we're not prepared because we're from Arkansas, but in fact we
Yeah.
are. And part of what I take away from this, and I don't know if you had a similar experience in Spelman or in other places where you've lived, but is part of the benefit of folks leaving the state oftentimes for things, for at least, for a while, is that you get to actually show people what it means to be from Arkansas. Because a lot of folks don't know what that looks like, right? They don't know what it means, or
Yeah.
they have these really misguided stereotypes or assumptions about what it means to be a Black woman from Arkansas, or what it means to be a
Yeah.
Black person from rural Arkansas, or in my case, what it means to be a Black daughter of a single mother from Arkansas. Like, all of those kinds
Yeah.
of things, people have all kinds of assumptions about. And then when you show up and you're like, you know what, I'm going to compete with you, and I'm pretty good too. That's not only a lesson for us in terms of our own inferiority complexes, which many of us have, or imposter syndrome kinds of things that we may have,
Mm,
but it's also
yeah.
a lesson for those around us. So I don't know if there's other things you'd like to add about that.
For sure. So I eventually found other women at Spelman who also were from Arkansas. And these are some salt of the earth, smart, intelligent, witty women that are, like after watching their success from afar, are doing some amazing, incredible things. And so it was something that whenever we showed up in a room, kind of highlighting that sort of Arkansan way, I guess you could say. Not just the Southern hospitality, because, we're in Atlanta, they have that, but kind of a different way of kind of highlighting and debunking a lot of those stereotypes, right? So no, we're not all related. Right? No, we're not all trying to be, barefoot, pregnant, whatever have you, whatever those stereotypes are and were. But really highlighting and kind of just, being able to also share with them our families. I have friends from all over the world, and that they come back to Arkansas and they want to come back to Arkansas and visit. And I've taken them around the city and different places. We've gone to Hot Springs, and they're always just so surprised. Right. But I had to learn too that I'm kind of like the front porch, so to speak, of the state. And so now, maybe before, I don't know how much pride I had in that, but I definitely take that forth now.
It's interesting because I think a lot of times these experiences we have help us develop that pride, or at least they did for
Yeah,
me as
for
well. I mean,
sure.
I definitely I remember when I left, I went to college in Pennsylvania, so different sort of first few years experience there before I moved to Atlanta.
Hmm.
Um, but very much cultivated a Southern pride in a way that I'd never even thought was a thing for, frankly, for us, for Black folks at all. I mean, it was not, I was very cool with my family. I was rooted and, knew what it meant to
Hmm.
be Black and knew what it meant to be a woman. This notion of having Southern being part of my understanding of who I was really cultivated when I was not in the South and like provided me that pride.
Same.
Yeah. Yeah. That's again, I think that's a real benefit sometimes for being able to go away for a little while and have a little bit of perspective on this place that maybe we, you know, might have taken for granted certain kinds of things, might have thought differently about ourselves because we hadn't seen quite what other folks were doing. And then you go and you see like, oh, we're actually doing pretty good. There's some good stuff here.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely gained that perspective having moved away, experienced other cultures, and coming back and understanding the positive things that are in our state. But yeah, that didn't happen until after leaving.
Yeah, I totally hear you on that. So talk to me about, you didn't stay in Atlanta forever. You graduated obviously with honors, so
I
kudos to you on that.
didn't.
And then talk to me about your next
Oh,
step.
I don't know so much honors, but I mean, to me, yeah. So cum laude was what it was. Let me get the fact check there. Fact check myself on that. But yeah,
That's excellent.
I went to Minneapolis right after graduating from Atlanta, from Spelman, and moved to Minneapolis to go to the Humphrey School at the University of Minneapolis, University of Minnesota. And I was able to go there. I received kind of like a fellowship, a summer research, part of a summer research program while being at Spelman the first 2 summers. And then eventually moving up there to do urban and regional planning. So I eventually wanted to go and become a lawyer. So I was pre-law, and then realized having, lots of student loans and having spent 4 years, was thinking about, well, what kind of career do I really want that I don't have to go the full for, 3 years, not have to be saddled with debt, and also being able to do a career that I could actually kind of get a job and do pretty well in. And I was able to, lay the foundation for talking with community leaders and seeing town planners. So that's and being part of that research program was able to afford me the opportunity to be able to go to the University of Minnesota. So I get there in Minnesota, such a culture shock. It's a melting pot of various cultures, which I definitely loved. It's, the North. So you're Pennsylvania, me in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I got there in the summer. So I wouldn't advise you to kind of move to Minnesota in the summer, but if you do, make sure you get your coats and things during the summer when they're cheaper, because I got a rude awakening whenever October hit, not December, October. I mean, cold. But learning how to, in Atlanta, being able to experience public transportation for the first time, and then moving up to Minnesota and doing it there. But I think I really, from Minneapolis, seeing, like this Blackness no longer being a token, being able to, highlight, seeing people in Black people in leadership positions, and then moving and having the church still, that spirituality still being a very much a part of me, being able to connect that whenever I moved to Minneapolis, and connecting into that piece of where I wanted to be, and what I wanted to do in Minneapolis. So not only just kind of going up there for school, but building out, like a further connection of spirituality and having that connection, but definitely being really, really far from home.
Part of what we're really excited about this series, the Choosing Arkansas series, is really sharing it, obviously beyond Arkansas, right? We want people to make an Arkansas choice. And I'm thinking about, as you talk about Minneapolis, thought about this with Atlanta too, but I think about all the Arkansas rooted people I know who are in Minneapolis. So shout out to y'all. Hint, hint.
Stay strong. Minneapolis is a really surprising city. It's very similar to Arkansas, natural amenities, very, rivers, lakes, things like that. So definitely loved it from that aspect, as well as had some really great connections and relationships there.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Well, we got you out of Bigelow to Atlanta, from Atlanta to Minneapolis. So I think with that, we'll take a break for a moment and hear from our sponsor. When we come back, we'll talk about how you made it back to Arkansas. So stay tuned now for a word from our sponsor. Welcome back to Choosing Arkansas, where we share the stories of those who chose Arkansas as their home and encourage you to do the same. So we've been talking with Samantha Evans, and when we left, she was talking about her time in Minneapolis at the Humphrey School. And so now I want to ask about what influenced your decision to come back to Arkansas.
Ooh, so I have to say, love influenced me to come back to Arkansas. It's about a boy. I'm a reader, and I read lots of romance novels. But on that note, I was in Minneapolis, doing really great, getting my master's degree, having lots of fun, making lots of connections. And I found myself pregnant unexpectedly. And in my second year of getting my master's degree. And I was like, oh boy, well, this was not a part of the plan, Samantha, at all. And I was never one of those girls that grew up, you know, playing out getting married and thinking about wedding cakes and any of that, or children. I was just not thinking about that at all. But here I was there, and thankfully to the support of my parents. Oh my goodness, I just don't know where I would be without them, but they encouraged me to stay the course. And so while in Minneapolis, I went to school and did my second year of grad school. I had some amazing friends who was able to help me to move things around, and had my son while in Minneapolis. And so I found myself a single mom, still in grad school, and doing an internship, not having a full-time job. And I'm so thankful for my mentor at that job. Um, she mentioned and said, hey, I've been here before. I know what it's like to be a single mom. I want to be able to say that if you want to stay here, then a job will be waiting for you. And I'm so thankful for that, because I was still in school. And I was able to kind of walk away before graduation, having a job there. And my parents saying, hey, we're going to, we love for you to be back in Arkansas. That's where we want you to be. But we understand. And I was like, no, I'm going to make it work in Minnesota. And I had all my family, members kind of just saying, well, we really would love for you to be back in Arkansas. I was like, well, there's nothing for me. I never saw a city planner, that career in Arkansas. I just didn't know what that looked like. I didn't have any one to identify with who had that sort of career progression. And so, as my grandmother would say, I had to learn that fat meat is greasy, right? So I was up there trying to make a go of it as a single mom. My brother, oh man, he came up for a week and helped me, or 2 weeks, I believe, to help me with my son. I had other friends coming into town. My son's father, he came into town and took care of him. But what I was finding, Karama, while in Minneapolis, was this really hard time. Like, I couldn't be Samantha, I couldn't have a career, and I couldn't be a mom all at the same time. I had this new identity that I was wrestling with and didn't know where to find myself. And rent was pretty high. I'm telling you, this was during the recession as well. Things were hard. And so here I was, trying to make things work, having some really great support from afar. But at the end of the day, it was just me and my kiddo, me and my infant, who didn't have a good sleeping pattern at all. And I had a job that would require me to, be out late at night answering calls. I was a property manager. So he would mostly be with me in the little carrier, and it just wasn't working well. And I just couldn't be a mom and Samantha, and do that well and keep that up. And so my dad was like, well, you can always come home. And Karama, whenever I was driving with, oh, that's a story for another time. When I drove across that Memphis bridge and saw the Arkansas State sign, I cried. I had this sort of set of home that that everything was going to be okay, right? I didn't know what okay was, but I knew it was going to be okay. And but I didn't know what that would look like for my son. And he was young enough to where, he came to Arkansas, he was in love. He had grandparents in the house with them. We had multi-generational living up in there. My brother was like, I got to get out of here. This is too many grown people living together at one place. But I had when I moved back home with my parents back to Arkansas, back in 2009, I had my aunts down the street from me, my uncle a street over, my grandparents down the road from me. Me and my son, we get in our dirt on that dirt road and try to walk that stroller up to, up the streets and visit my grandmother. We visited my grandparents, every Monday and Sunday. And my son was able to see them, on a regular basis. He would go to church and help do communion with his grandpa and set up for things like that. He would go to all the community meetings and see different folks. And I was like, yeah, I think I'm gonna, I moved to Arkansas because of a boy, because of my son. But love is what continued to make me think about it and continues to keep me here. And that family support. And I was like, well, I may only be here maybe 5 years, right? I don't know where we get that 5-year term from. But I was like, maybe I'll just be here 5 years. But it was after my son, he turned 1. And my grandmother was like, we have to do a baby dedication. I was like, well, Grandma, he's 1 now. He didn't get to do it when he was an infant. But she was very adamant about this. So I said, okay, we'll do it at his 1-year birthday. And my mother, my son and mother have a very strong connection with one another because, they helped to raise him. So we had the baby dedication, and afterwards we had this a big birthday party for him at our park nearby, at the Toadstock Park. And there was over, I think, 100 people there. We had family, friends, neighbors of friends who cooked the catfish, because my son, he's an Arkansan. You can't tell him anything. He's like, his gut is so Arkansan. And so he had catfish at his birthday party. Somebody was grilling. I mean, it was like 100 people at his birthday party. And to have that love there for my son in that way, and for them, they continuously show up, in that way. My son is able to thrive here. And so that's really why I was thinking of you know, when I think about legacy right now that I'm here and thinking long term, I think that's the thing that I want to be able to leave behind. And I want to be that for others now. As they're, I have cousins, I'm like, yeah, you can, come back to Arkansas. And always when they come, I want to be able to have them to see that love here for them whenever they return.
I so appreciate you sharing this story. It I think there are all kinds of life happens, right? And so things happen and
Ooh.
one has to make decisions based on the situation that one is in. And I think, for you to come back and sort of see perhaps through someone else's eyes, the love and the support that you had growing up, you see that now for your son, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, wait, now I get this in a whole different way. And I feel very much the same. My daughter was born in Atlanta, and my husband and I, when we moved back to Arkansas, he's not from here at all. We moved to Arkansas, like, that was one of the things that was very moving for me. Like, we go to the church that I grew up in, the AME church that I grew up in, and I can, my
Mm-hmm.
daughter, even though my mother's deceased, my grandmother's deceased, but she knows where they sat in church, and she sees the folks who knew them, and she grew up, for a long time knowing one of my grandmother's really good friends, and all of our relatives, and so it really, there
Mm-hmm.
is something really compelling about that. And I think, sometimes we know it and we come back for it. Sometimes we may
Yeah.
not have thought about it, but then we get here and we're like, oh yeah, there's actually some worth here. There's some value to this. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. Whenever I was growing up, I didn't like the fact that somebody could be able to tell on me before I got home. Now, as a mom, I want somebody to tell on my child before they get home. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it's a different how I view that, then versus now is different.
that's really excellent. Talk to me, if you would, about, like, what were the things that, as you, from your perspective, are there things that you found challenging about moving home? Are there things that you found surprising, pleasantly or otherwise, about moving back home?
Ooh. So the things that I found most surprising is that things hadn't changed, but changed, right? And so from as little to the little known fact of the community grocery store, changing owners, changing out the things that they offered, but still being able to serve, like, get your sandwich and lunch meat from down there. And there's people who you went to high school with who know of you, um, to as big as, understanding around the conversation about how we talk and discuss race, and having those conversations with my son that my dad had with my brother and me. And so I think in being able to understand that in terms of that, is something that was, I wouldn't say so much as surprising, but it was surprising, is that things changed, but things didn't change. But then also things have changed. So before, whereas folks would maybe be quiet or maybe brush things around the rug, or maybe how we think about that, how we see small businesses and seeing, different folks and different cultures. Like, I grew up in a community that was predominantly Black. I grew up in a small little contingent, it was predominantly white town. But now there's different cultures, right? There's all different types. And just seeing, like, who my son, I live in the town over from where I grew up, and he's going to school with all different types of folks. And so the diversity in that, and the diversity of discussion and what the possibilities are here have grown. I had a cousin who came back from California who's thinking about moving here. So hopefully this podcast, I'll send it this way. But was just pleasantly surprised. He's like, I went downtown North Little Rock, and like this, the restaurants were awesome. This is something that I would experience in LA that I didn't even know that we had here. And so I think that being able to, and I'm like, yeah, we have some amazing restaurants. We have, ways in which you can get involved, and, it's not just one person can speak for the whole community. There's places where you can plug in here and, be, Arkansas is a really small state, but you can really get some things done here. And so and also pleasantly surprised by how I've been able to build a career here as well, and being able to do work that I'm really passionate about here.
I'm so pleased to hear you say that. I feel like it echoes, and we had not planned all this, but it really does echo my experience a lot because I think about, what it, so many folks I know, myself included, and certainly others as well, um, you sort of assume it's like when you left it, right? So you left it,
Mm,
you left the place when you're in high school. For me, when I was in high school as well, for some others, it may have been a different time. And, in our minds, it stays the same, but it doesn't. Like those folks are going on living their lives. And yeah, you come home maybe at the holidays or for a little while here or there, but it's not the same as living. And then when you
right.
do leave, you're like, oh, wait, things have changed. And oftentimes, many times for the better in ways that are really,
For the
encouraging. And I think part of, when I think about choosing Arkansas, right, and encouraging other folks to choose Arkansas, part of it is really understanding what the state, especially if it's folks who are returnees like we are,
Mhm.
don't assume it's like what it was when you left. They're, to your point, some things stay the same, but some things change. And so,
Oh, for sure.
take a look at it and see what it's like now, and see, can you make it work now? See what it's like as an adult, right? For folks like
Right.
you and me that left, frankly, as children, at some level, it's one thing to live someplace when you're 15, 16, 17, 18. It's another thing when you're grown,
Right.
and
So,
that's
so
different. Yeah,
true.
please.
Yeah. So, I can make a day of just kind of going vacationing in my own backyard, in the state, and taking on these different experiences. I have so many friends who are now going vegan, and we have some amazing vegan restaurants, amazing museums where you can just kind of get out and play and have fun. But then also being a part of like delving into the community and being there and being a part of what you want to see the community do to grow. Like in Atlanta, such a big city, right? Everyone is doing amazing things, but like being a intricate part of that and being connected, 1 or 2 degrees from people who are getting things done, um, is just one of those things here that I just would hope folks kind of just take a chance in Arkansas. And the really great thing we say in Arkansas, you can really pick up the phone if there's something you want to do or get done or want to have questions about. You can usually be able to get on the phone or connect to someone who can maybe put you in a space to being able to do that. And I'm not saying that you couldn't do that in Atlanta, but like here in Arkansas, you can be, a big fish in a small pond, but in a pond that wants to see you thrive, right?
Fully agree. And again, echoes some of the language, even echoes the way I talk about this as well. I think about a friend of mine who I went to high school with, who left and went to Stanford and stayed in California. And at one point, this was just before the pandemic, so he hasn't quite made that move yet, but he was thinking about moving
Mm-hmm.
back home. And he came back home, visited his parents, but then also took like 2 or 3 days in Little Rock, 2 or 3 days in Northwest Arkansas to do informational interviews, right? To see
Yeah.
what would it be like to live as a grown person in this place that I haven't lived in since I was 17 years old. What would that actually look like? And I remember I did a lot of email introductions and stuff for him. And then we connected after he had taken his trip and met all the folks and everything. And he said, Arkansas is like a 2 call town. I was like, yeah. It's like, and it's not that you're bragging. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a small state. I went to school with so and so is my cousin. My cousin went to school with them. Like you can get to who it is you need to get
Too.
to get things done. And I
Right.
agree with you. I feel like the career trajectory that I've had, there's very little chance that could have happened in my time in Atlanta. And Atlanta was wonderful. I've had a wonderful time there. Met my husband there. Okay, but it's a great place. But I could not have had the career trajectory there that I've had here.
Yeah.
And so
I
it's a
would
testament
echo
to
that
small
for
state.
me as well, for sure.
Yeah. Well, talk to me as we begin to sort of close and wrap up. When we approached you about this, of course, we so appreciate you saying yes and being willing to do this. If you would share a little bit about why you felt like this was something that you were willing to do and wanted to do in terms of having this
Yes.
conversation.
So I'm the daughter of Sherry Coleman Evans, the granddaughter of Mary Lee Coleman Ward, the great granddaughter of Daisy Falls Coleman, and the great great granddaughter of Leslie Hunter Falls. And I come from some really amazing women, matriarchs in my family. We're coming up and celebrating our family reunion that we've been doing for over 40 years, but stopped during COVID. But it was very important for us to come back together and come together as a family. And we have, you know, family members from Ohio and the Carolinas and Chicago and California. And I think in thinking about that, understanding, you know, why we choose Arkansas, why my, you know, ancestors and those before me chose Arkansas. And I think it's a testament to being able to speak to that, is why I chose to do this and thinking about choosing Arkansas and being able to have this sort of um, note here to being able to highlight that for our family as we're, you know, moving beyond and building even more, you know, a legacy of women who are thinking about what matters and what matters to our family and to our community. So, yeah, that's
That's really
kind of how it
excellent.
works down for me.
It's really great to hear. And I think, you know, I was going to say, I'll ask this anyway, but you may have already answered this. Like, you know, keeping in mind, I think most of us, many of us who are myself, you, probably most of our listeners will have family in that same situation. They may be the family who are in that situation, right? They may be the cousin that's in Chicago and California and Ohio, talking to y'all, my cousins who are in those places. Like, you know, there may be those cousins or those relatives or those friends. And I think, you know, part of what I was going to say is, you know, what would you say to those folks? You may have already said it, but if there's anything else as a sort of closing remark, if there's anything else you'd like to add, would love to hear that too.
Yeah, you know, we have all this land here in Arkansas, whether it's air property or, you know, your cousins are thinking about it. That's kind of what's been kind of happening in our family. And thinking about, you know, when you're thinking about your family, and we're always talking about building legacy and building generational wealth, I think Arkansas is a great space to think about that for you and your family and to continue that legacy, and build it here where you can find your passion, get connected, building community, and sharing a space of success. And I think that it has been not all rosy for me. It took me a while to get there, and I'm still working to get there. But I want to be able to do that and build with the folks, you know, in my family members as well, not only just here, but all over Arkansas. You know, there's always, when I go out, they're like, oh, yeah, I know such and such from Arkansas, right? And so I'm always talking about like how to get those folks connected, and thinking about how we can be able to make the state better. Like you can't complain about something that you don't want to be and try to think about and be a part of making it better. And I think that that's one way to being able to do that and to think about that. We need you.
Absolutely, and as you said earlier, it's a great place for folks to get involved who want to do that, who want to, you know, be involved and be active and help make things better. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Sam. This has been such a pleasure. And I so appreciate, I know our listeners do as well, just the generosity with which you shared your story. Thank you so much for doing that. We're grateful to you and hope that you will share this as it comes out, share it with others who might be interested in seeing this. And of course, we're grateful to you all who are watching us or listening to us on Choosing Arkansas. We really hope these conversations will inspire you to share this video, to learn more about the professional, the educational, the social, the other kinds of opportunities that there are in this state. And we hope that you choose Arkansas for yourself soon. So we're eager to welcome you home. And in the meantime, we welcome your comments or your feedback at choosingAR for Choosing Arkansas, choosingAR@gmail.com. So feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you again next time. Thank y'all.